So let's look at hypothesis testing. To better understand hypothesis testing, we will talk about null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Imagine I believe that if you invest in the stock of company XYZ that is based in Congo, that you would make a return that is not equals to 0. That's my belief. Then that my belief should fit into the alternative hypothesis. Then my null hypothesis will be that the average return on the stock of company XYZ will be equals to 0. Because we know that the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis are mutually exclusive. Since the return is equals to 0, that's the average return is equals to 0, that means it is statistically insignificant. And if the average return is not equals to 0, then it is statistically significant. I know candidates typically would be confused about being significant and not being significant. The way to look at it is from the perspective of your bank account. If you have $10 in your bank account, it's significant to you. If you have negative $10 in your bank account, it is significant. So once it is not 0, then it is significant. But if you have $0 in your bank account, then it is statistically insignificant. So let's look at the concept of type 1 error and type 2 error. But we will start with type 1 error. Normally, a null hypothesis that is true, that is the facts, you should naturally accept it. But if you are rejecting a null hypothesis that is true, then you have committed type 1 error. For type 2 error, a null hypothesis that is false, it's a lie, it's false, it's not true. What should you do to it? You should reject it. But by the time you are accepting a null hypothesis that is false, then you are committing type 2 error. It's very important to note that we do not use the word accept as far as statistics is concerned. And the major reason behind that is because when it comes to statistics, it can be likened to what we see in the law court. The law court will never pronounce you innocent. You are either guilty or not guilty. And why are they saying you are either guilty or not guilty? Because with further evidence, if you were initially pronounced guilty, you can now become not guilty, and vice versa. The same thing applies to statistics. And that's the major reason why we do not use the word accept. So what we use is fail to reject. It's also very important to note that the probability of committing type 1 error is what we call level of significance. Level of significance. We typically will connote it using alpha. So there is also the concept of one-tail test and two-tail test. So let's get started with one-tail test. A one-tail test is a unidirectional question. If I believe that the average return that you would make on stock XYZ is greater than 0. This is a unidirectional question. So using 0 as a landmark, that means my belief is that the return you can only make on that stock XYZ is only in one direction, above 0. But if I believe that if you invest in stock XYZ, the return you can make is not equals to 0. That means you could make above 0, that's one direction, or you could make below 0, that's another direction. So that's a two-directional question or a two-sided question. So let's look at the decision rule. As far as hypothesis testing is concerned, you have stated your null. Let's use the same example. Average return is not equals to 0. You've stated this is your alternative, so your null is equals to 0. So average return is not equals to 0, that's alternative. Average return is equals to 0 is your null. So you've stated this. Then you would calculate your t-stats, your test statistic. It could be F statistic, it could be T statistic, and so on and so forth. So your test statistics, you've calculated it. And generally speaking, your test statistics will be xi minus hypothesized value over standard error. So your hypothesized value is the number, the reference number the researcher made mention of. Here, in this case, it is 0. We will talk more about others much more later. Then we have T critical. T critical is what you have on your table, is what you check on your table. So if your T stat is greater than your T critical, what do? You would reject your null. So you would reject your null. When deciding whether to reject or fail to reject your null, it's important to note that you need to neglect the signs. You do not have to worry about the sign of your test statistic, whether it is positive or negative, neglect it. The same thing for T critical. So you should neglect the sign. So once the sign, without the sign, I mean, once it is greater than, that's the sign of T stat, once it is greater than T critical, then you reject your null. And if you reject your null, that means you are rejecting this. You are saying this is not true. Then you are accepting this. But we said we do not use the word accept. What we use is to fails to reject the alternative hypothesis.